Here's part 2 of my awesome interview with Duncan Dobie. If you haven't seen the first one, go back and watch it. Then you can watch this. In this episode, we're going to talk about Fred Goodwin, the Silver Ridge buck, and the King buck, and some other stuff too. But thanks for watching. Click like and subscribe, and here we go. So let's jump from. We have you've written about a very famous character in our neck of the woods up here. I've got a picture of you posing with his deer. That great character from the Northeast is Fred Goodwin.
Oh yes.
That's my and you've met Fred. You knew Fred.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. I never had that pleasure.
We well, when North American Whitetail magazine started, Dick Idle was very part of the magazine. Was a very integral part of the magazine, and he bought, as you know, probably bought Fred's antler collection, and that was really kind of a sad happening because Fred had over 1,200 racks in his collection, and over 100 of them were Boone and Crockett racks, mostly from Maine, but from the Northeast. And so you can imagine what 100 Boone and Crockett racks, and some of the top Maine heads were in his collection. And he decided Fred was in his 70s in the mid 1980s, and he just decided, I'm getting kind of old. I think I need to sell my antler collection. And so he put out some feelers and talked to, and he knew antler collectors all over the country. There weren't that many, but he knew every one of them. And nobody, there were just no buyers. There were no takers. Nobody bought antler collections. And so Dick Idle came along and just bought that collection. We paid Fred $25,000 for 1,200 deer racks. And 100 of them, several of them today are worth over $25,000 just by themselves. So, Fred was glad to sell them and glad to get the money. And, but Fred was an amazing man. He lived to be 102 years old. He was born in 1909, Lincoln's birthday, Lincoln's anniversary day. And he started collecting antlers when he was 10 years old. And his dad would get so mad at him, he would drag these antlers home and put them in his room. And one day there was a story about him where his dad, he had like 20 sets of antlers in his bedroom, the upstairs bedroom, and his dad opened the window and threw them all out in the snow below because he just, he kept saying, you can't eat deer antlers, you can't eat deer antlers. And so, but Fred was just from his boyhood, he was fascinated with antlers. And when he got older, he had a motorcycle, he had a Harley Davidson that he took all over the place. He drove that thing to Texas to see he wanted to see the Lone Star, I guess it was a Lone Star. At that time, it was not the Lone Star Brew, it was the Lone Star Saloon that had this huge collection of deer antlers. He drove all the way from northern Maine down to San Antonio, Texas, just to see that collection. And he drove all over some of the Midwestern states like Iowa and Kansas, and he found the hole in the horn buck in Ohio. It was hanging in a bar. And so, he was a hunting guide during his younger years, in his 20s and 30s. He and his brother had a guide service, and they did a lot of guiding up there. They trapped. He was just all around outdoorsman, amazing outdoorsman.
He wrote a book, right?
Well, no books were ever written about him. I went up to visit him in the early 2000s. I think it was around 2002 to try to do a book. That's what the idea was, to do a book about him. And really, we wanted to do it with North American Whitetail during his lifetime while he was still alive, so that he could sign a bunch of them and be there when it came out. And he had a friend up there named Phil Osborne. I don't know if you've ever run into Phil.
Yep.
Know the name, but Phil was an antler collector, and he started buying a bunch of big, expensive deer heads at one time, and in the early 2000s. And Phil, unfortunately, kind of got in the way between me and Fred as far as trying to do a book. And so I spent a week up there interviewing Fred. I got a lot of tape recordings of stories he told me and things like that. And I was going to go back. I really wanted to go back and get a lot more. And so the short of it was North American Whitetail was all set to publish the book. They wanted to do it. But Phil Osborne, he wanted to be paid for the book. He thought that he should be paid something. And he didn't really have any position at all where, he should be paid. We were going to pay Fred Good. The magazine was going to pay Fred a little bit for his story. Yeah. But anyway, the short of it was the book never got done. And we were really sad because it would have been a great book. And, he had just, so many stories. And one of the great things that he did was a lot of those deer heads he collected were, Boone and Crockett record heads from the area, from Maine and some of the New England states, and then from Ontario and from around, the Canadian border. He had all the stories on all those deer. He remembered he never forgot anything. He knew all the stories, when they were killed, the dates, who killed them. And so a lot of that information was saved on a lot of those deer. Would have just gone by you would have never known, where they came from, but he documented a lot of those deer heads. So that was one of the great things he did.
Yeah, I wanted to do a painting of the Silver Ridge buck. I think that's how I first contacted you, was trying to figure out where it was, how to do that. And I ran into Phil at the big Great Eastern Outdoor Show maybe 10 years ago. And I tried to get permission to paint it because I knew he was kind of had claws into it. I knew he owned it. And he gave me the runaround, and I never got a straight answer, so I never did it.
That's what he is. He would never. Unfortunately, he's got some great. Phil, Fred was an incredible photographer, and from the early days when he was in his 20s, he took photos. For instance, during World War II, Fred had several accidents, and he was physically unable to go in the service. They wouldn't take him because one leg was shorter than the other. He had a very bad accident with on his motorcycle, almost died. And so anyway, short of it was that one leg was shorter than the other, and he could not go into service. He really wanted to serve his country during World War II. So he joined the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and he was sent to Alaska to work on the Alaskan pipeline, the Alaskan highway. Yep. And he spent a year in Alaska. And the photos he took up there were, you could do a book. They're Ansel Adams type photos, just incredible photos. You could do just a book. He took pictures of wolves, of, caribou, you name it. But then he had all kind of hunting, hunting in Maine, hunting, trapping, and bear hunting, deer hunting. Oh, he had incredible photos, and Phil got every one of those photos and just hoarded them. It won't let anybody use any of them. And I don't know what's going to happen to them because it's they need to be out in some kind of book or, some kind of historical document.
Fred's story really needs to be told in a way that people can really enjoy it and see it. A wonderful book would be perfect. And it just seems like a crime that so many people my age, they have no idea who Fred Goodwin is.
Yes. That's what we often wonder, like today, would a book like that really, could you get much interest in a book like that today? Because so many, 20 years ago, a lot of people, we were writing articles in North American Whitetail about Fred and people knew who he was. But today, people have forgotten him, and that's so sad. So many people get forgotten so quickly. Yeah. So I don't know if a book would work today as well as it would have 20 years ago. But yeah, it's still, he was an incredible antler collector. And I don't know if you know much about his Winchester collecting. He had an incredible Winchester collection. And he sold that.
He was the United States, the largest dealer of used Winchester parts at one point.
Yes. And he sold his Winchester collection shortly after he sold the antler collection. and he had, I think, over 1,200 Winchesters, lever guns, and he had about 100 Model 70s. And I mean, there's no telling what those guns were worth. And I mean, he had some of the very early 1900 Winchesters, saddle ring carbines and things like that. And then parts, it's kind of interesting because his dad was a horse trader, and that's how he got it. He was a chip off the old block. His dad, people would come to his dad and say, and his dad traded guns, knives, horses, mules, anything, they could make $1 on. And so they would sell these local farmers a Winchester for $10 or $5. And then at the end of deer season, the farmer would come back and say, will you buy my gun back? I need some money. And so they'd give him $4, and make a profit on it right there. And a lot of times they kept these old guns, and I mean, he kept the good ones. And so by, I guess, the mid-1980s, he had over 1,200 Winchesters, and he ended up selling that entire collection, and for nothing. I mean, for just dollars, pennies on the dollar.
Those old.
Also, what was so interesting, when you went in his house, he had a room in the back where he had shoe boxes, just wall to wall shelves with shoe boxes on them with Winchester parts. And so if somebody, and in those days there was no internet, so people would write him or call him on the phone. People would call from California and say, do you have a spring for such and such a 1903 Winchester? And he'd go back there and, yeah, I got one. And he'd pack it out and send it to him. So he knew he'd get these old rifles that were all beat up and just take the parts out and sell the parts. So, yeah, he was amazing. He was they just don't make them like that anymore.
No. And that's why I always think about Fred and say, people really need to know about him. And if anybody's watching this, you can find a lot of stuff about Fred Goodwin on the internet, but it doesn't go into depth of the actual man. It just gives basically what we've talked about, just the known items that people do know. Mainly, a lot of it from your article in North American Whitetail is most of what you find, and there's so much more. I mean, he was in the circus, if I'm correct. I mean, he did all of these things. He lived the life. It was a true Walter Mitty life.
It was. He was an adventurer. He spent his whole life just doing amazing things and lived to be 102. And interestingly, when he had his 100th birthday, some of his friends planned a big party for him up in Silver Ridge. And I was going to go, and several people I knew were going to go to his party. His birthday was on the same date as mine, January 3rd. So we always kidded about it. And so I told him, I said, when you turn 100, I want to come to your birthday party. And so we planned on it. And sure enough, when he turned 100, we had a big party, and I got the flu. And one of the few times in my life I'd ever really had the flu. And I mean, I had a fever and everything, and I just couldn't go up there and expose him or, expose other people. So I stayed home. I didn't go. But they had a great party. And and he lived for a couple more years after that. And he was so sharp, like so many older people, when your body starts failing and you have a hard time walking around and you have to use a walker and things like that. His mind was so sharp, and he could remember things, stories, incidents. Oh, so many great stories.
So let's talk about the Silver Ridge buck itself, because that is basically, I think that's how I fell into the Fred Goodwin mystique, was a picture of that massive Maine buck, the Silver Ridge buck. And I believe you wrote the story about how he shot that buck and all. You saw that buck in person. You saw the mount. Is it as big as it looks in the pictures?
Oh, it is. It is. It is just, it's jaw dropping when you look at it and see it. I mean, it is so wide and heavy, and just, it's a beautiful rack, just incredible deer. One of Maine's greatest. It didn't score that much, but it was, it's a great deer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, visually, it's like so many great bucks. It may not score well, Boone and Crockett, but visually, it will knock your socks off.
Exactly.
There's been
so the stories about it, Fred would kind of he loved to embellish his stories a lot of times, and so you never really knew, a lot of times things would change a little bit. But I mean, he hunted that deer, and I think his brother had hunted the deer some too, and then when he finally killed it, and he had, you probably know this if you've read the story, but he had a hunter, a group from Pennsylvania that always came and hunted with him. And I think the guy was sold trapping supplies, and Fred was really into trapping too, so they got along really well, and they did a lot of things on what to use, how to use certain lures and scents and different things for trapping. And the guy, when he saw that Silver Ridge buck, he said, "Man, I got to have this rack." He said, "What do you take for it?" And Fred said, "Well, what do you give me?" He said, I'll give you $100 for it." And that was like probably 1,000 or 5,000 back then.
Mm-hmm.
And Fred, $100, sure, And so Fred sold it to him. He said, "But I'll sell it to you under one condition." He said, "If you die before I do, I get it back." And the thing was so massive, and you probably heard this, that he was going home on the train. He had to actually break the antlers, break the skull plate or separate it, so he could take the antlers on the train with him, because it was just too big to take back as a big wide rat. So that's how the antlers actually got separated. And he took them home to Pennsylvania, kept them, and years later, I guess sometime in the 80s, he passed away, and Fred got the rack back and got it mounted and took possession of it again.
I mean, how wide was it? I mean, do you remember at all the inside spread of that? I mean,
I think it's like 26 something. I don't remember exactly, but it is very wide and just massive.
It's definitely unique.
Yeah, that classic picture of Fred standing behind his old flatbed truck, with the deer in the truck. And when I went to visit Fred in 2002, we went to the old home place, and it was still there. Nobody was there. And we went back to the garage. The truck was still parked back there in the garage, just rusting away. And all the deer heads that Dick Idle had bought from him, Dick had rented a big U-Haul trailer, and a lot of the deer were mounted. A lot of them were not mounted, the racks Dick Idle bought. But a lot of the ones that were mounted, the mounts were just falling apart, all moth-eaten and everything. So Dick just took them all off the rack and threw them in a big pile, and that pile was still there in the barn.
That's the picture you're talking about right there.
Yeah, that's
so you guys can see that rack it looks like a mule deer. It's so big in the old military truck. That just
it does. I mean, it doesn't look real. It looks like it's a fake photo. It's so wide. It may be wider than 26. I forget exactly how wide that deer is. Fred
looks so dapper in that hat.
That was his leather jacket. He loved to wear that leather jacket.
I would have just loved to talk to him for an hour, just to sit there.
You could just talk to him, all night long. He was amazing.
That's pretty cool. So if you were to give anybody any inspiration for wanting to become an outdoor writer, to want to be to write books, what would your word of advice be to them?
I'd say you have to have a passion for it, and if you have a specialty, like if you say you like to go bass, you love to bass fish or deer hunt, you want to write about deer hunting, and try to. It's changed a lot in that a lot of the magazines have gone by the wayside in the last 20 years, and with some of the economic things that have happened, it's just the magazine business is not what it was, but there's still a lot of online information. You can sell stories online, and there still are some magazines. And I would just say, you know, be determined, don't give up, and, you know, just start writing to these magazines, send them story ideas, and kind of follow what the editors want, the way they want it, the way they want them presented. And sooner or later, you know, you're going to start selling a few stories. And it's, you know, it's not a business that you can get rich at, but, you know, I would say you ought to have another job. You know, if you have a good job and, you know, pay your bills, that's fine. But writing could be a nice hobby. And it's very difficult for a young man to make a living being an outdoor writer these days. Mm-hmm. Because it, you know, actually it pays less than it used to pay. So
yeah,
you know, the pay scale has gone down instead of up.
Right. Do you think the internet has played a big part in that?
I don't, it's hard to say because the information, you know, so much information is just out instantly now. And that's the thing, you know, in the old days, I mean, even back in the 80s and 90s when a big deer was killed, you know, North American Whitetail would try to get the story on it and, you know, keep it under wraps for a couple of months until the story came out. But a lot of times it might be 6 or 8 months before that story came out in print, unless it was a world record or something. And then they could pull some strings and have a story in the next issue if they really wanted to. But with the advent of the internet, you know, everything was so instant. Everybody knew about any big deer killed in North America, you know, within hours of the time it was killed. Everybody knew about it and saw pictures of it, knew who killed it, where, all the details. So the stories is not as important in the magazine, even though they wanted, you know, people love to get North American Whitetail and others to just to read the story again and look at the pictures. Like, look at the picture. You never get tired of looking at that picture of Fred Goodwin with the Silver Ridge buck.
No, if I could do a mural, I'd have it as a mural here, someplace at the house.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it just, you know, it's something you want to hang on the wall. So I don't know. I guess there's so many things. I guess the internet has had a lot to do with everything being so fast and rapid and instantaneous now. And people don't read, I mean, books. People don't read books like they used to, outdoor books, or any kind of books, really, like they used to. And so I don't know I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know where it's going to end up. I think, you know, everybody says books are going to be going out and everything's going to be this, you know, online stuff. I think books will always be around. I think there's a love for books that a lot of people have. But it's a small percentage of people. It's not, you know, the majority by any stretch.
I think it'll be like classic cars.
Yeah.
You know, you drive a car today and it's nice and it's smooth and it goes good. You drive one of those old cars and it's clunky and it's loud and it's noisy, but there's a mystique to it.
There is.
It is very cool to be seen in a 67 GTO compared to a 85 Hyundai. So I think there will always be a market for books, just like there will be for classic cars. It just, like you said, it won't be like it is or was.
Yeah, I just think like Dawn of American Deer Hunting, I think there's always going to be a market there'll always be a certain number of hunters who want to just look at those old pictures and read about Fred Goodwin or Larry Benoit in Vermont or people like that who were icons in their day.
Yep. I mean, Larry is still a legendary figure, especially here in the Northeast. I mean, anybody knows, has talked to Larry, has met him at the shows, have gone to their seminars with the boys. Everybody knows who they are. But at what point do we lose that? To me, that's the sad part is, without having books, without having print, people are going to lose that part of the history. And it's nice having these books that you have here that preserve it. And in a lot of respects, I have in our group, there's a contingent of very young fellas who are up and coming, and they idolize these people. They love your books. So don't give up hope. I'm pretty sure that if enough of us older guys can grab these younger guys and get them into it, there'll always be a market for
Well, I
this.
hope so. I hope we can sell a few of the new one when it comes out. We'll see.
Oh, I know that every single one of the guys in my group want one. So I'm pretty sure that I'm going to have them on board. Now, speaking of that,
the Northeast has been a huge market for the book. You know, Maine and all the northeastern states have been great because there's so much interest. New York, we sold a lot of books in New York.
Yeah, the Adirondacks are huge. Yeah. So where can people find your book? I mean, buy it direct from you, or
they can buy direct from me. And I still have a few volume 1 books left. And then I have plenty of volume 2 books. And then they can also buy both books from Sporting Classics magazine. They can go online and just look up Sporting Classics. And they have a bookstore, and they have some great books, by the way, too. Besides mine, I mean, they do some really, really good books.
Yeah, they do. Go to their site and check that out, because they do have a lot of nice stuff there. I mean, I'm a book nut anyways. I love the books. I want the pictures in my hand. I want to be able to look at it. I don't want to have to fire the computer up. I'm a Luddite when it comes to electronics.
Well, I'm the same way, and especially, again, when you're flipping through the pages of a book like Dawn of American Deer Hunting or Legendary Whitetails, where you have these stories about these huge bucks, you want to see those pictures and turn the page and just sit there and look. I mean, and looking at it on a computer screen, it's different. It's not like looking at a book. It's sitting on your coffee table.
What was that book series? Legendary Whitetails? Was that the book series that has all the great whitetails?
Yeah, there were 3 of those done, and the last one I did the whole book, and I also did that with Krause Publications in around 2012. And each of the very well-known antler collector Larry Huffman from Wisconsin had started collecting all these just legendary whitetails, like the hole in the horn buck and the Jordan buck from Wisconsin. And he had, so the first book in the late 1990s, there were 40 stories in the first book, and he owned, I think, every one of those deer heads at the time in his collection. And that's why he wanted to do a book. And he did a very nice, very upscale, money was no object type thing. They had nice studio photos of all the deer. And so I had several stories in that first book. And then a few years later, he did a second book, and with 40 more legendary whitetails. And he didn't own those, the second volume. He owned some of those, but not all of them. And they were just deer that, great deer that needed to be written about. And so that book did very well. And then we had talked about doing another one. And then Larry died in 2007. And it just everything just kind of ended with what he was doing and publishing and all. And so I started talking to Krause Publications about doing some books, and we ended up doing volume 3. Mm-hmm. And I did the entire book, all 40 stories, 40 more. And we're talking about doing a volume 4 now in maybe a year or so.
That would be great. I mean, because there's been some unbelievable bucks shot in the last.
Oh gosh, yeah, there have been. I mean, you wouldn't believe 20 years ago if you had told me, all these 300-inch deer are going to be killed, I'd say you're crazy.
Yeah, no kidding. It's been 300 inches. Wild, free range whitetails, 300 inches. Insane. It's unbelievable. I do believe that the volume 3 has one of my favorite bucks, the Johnny King buck, in it.
Yes, it did. In fact, we put it on the cover. And I have done a lot of writing about the Johnny King buck. So,
talking about
a book on that now. I'm writing a book about the Johnny King buck.
No kidding. Jay's involved.
It's going to be Jay's book, and Jay and Johnny. And actually, as soon as I finish Dawn of American Deer Hunting, I've got to get. We've done a lot of preliminary stuff on it. We're going to try to have it out by January.
Yep.
Because he wants to have it out for all
controversial.
Yeah.
That's about that one.
Yeah.
They want to tell the story, and it's a story that needs to be told, and so there's a lot of interesting stuff that went on with that deer.
Absolutely. And Jay's an interesting character within himself.
He really is, yeah.
He is. He's a great guy. Him and Johnny. Johnny is as salt of the earth kind of guy you've ever met. So
oh yeah, they both are. They both are, and they both love. They just love deer hunting and love the outdoors, and they're just such good people. You know, both of them are just such good men.
Absolutely. And I love Johnny's gun that he shot the deer with. That is just... Me
too. Oh, that's one of my favorites, so the old cool. Savage. Yeah. I've been trying to get it off, buy it off of him, but he won't sell it. He's going to pass it on.
Is it still broken?
I don't know, but he's going to, I talked to him not too long ago, and he said, I think he's going to give it to his nephew.
Yeah, I guess it had been passed down through the family.
It has, yeah.
Yeah, a bolt action 30-30 Savage. Just not what you would expect somebody. Yeah. Whenever you see a deer of that caliber, you expect some big fancy new high-tech gun, and he shot it with an old Savage 30-30 bolt action. It was just kind of cool.
The scope, just an old primitive gun, but
yeah. But that deer was...
That's all you need.
Oh yeah, that was a heck of a buck. I've actually got to see that buck in person. They brought it up to the Rutland Outdoor Show that they had. I don't know, that was quite a while ago. And I got to meet Johnny and Jay, and just great guys. And yeah, I can't wait for that book to come out. That'll be awesome. Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I'm excited about that too. I think it's a great story. So
yeah. Absolutely. So what other than the that book with Johnny King and everything, what is there anything else you're working on?
Well, there's another one that's very interesting to me. I have a very good friend who was 92 years old, and he passed away in January of this year. And he was a Korean War veteran, and he started an animal zoo in the Atlanta area. Have you ever heard of Stone Mountain, Georgia?
Yes, yeah.
Well, Stone Mountain is just a rock mountain that rises up. It's kind of a round mountain of rock, granite, solid granite. It's 800 feet tall, just rises up out of the ground. And in around 1960, the state of Georgia bought the Stone Mountain and made a park out in the land around it, and they made to have a state park there. And so he had just gotten, he was a Korean War veteran. He was from San Antonio, Texas, and he was transferred. He stayed in the reserves when he got back from the war, and was in the reserves in San Antonio, and they transferred him to Atlanta. And he and his wife, decided, well, we'll go to Atlanta for a year or 2 or 3 and see how we like it, and then we'll probably go back home to San Antonio. Well, when the state bought Stone Mountain Park, they started looking for vendors to go in there and have businesses. And he had grown up hunting in South Texas, an avid deer hunter, and he and his brother and family, they just, they love to go out in the brush country and just watch deer and look at them and walk around and not just hunt, but just be out there and see deer, just watch deer. I'll feed them and watch them. And so he always had this idea that if I could have a park, that where people could walk around and have deer, just tame deer walking around, mingling with the people, where you feed them corn or whatever. And, children can pet them and different things like that. So he went to Stone Mountain and approached them with this idea he had for an animal park where deer would be, basically he would be showcasing white-tailed deer. And they ended up letting him they gave him like 18 acres of land in there on a long-term lease. And so he built what they call the Stone Mountain Game Ranch. And he called it a game ranch because deer are game animals, and he didn't want it to be like a zoo. And so, and it struggled. I mean, it took everything he could beg, borrow, and almost steal to get it going. And, they struggled for years, but then it finally just took off. And so he had a lot, the focus of the whole thing was the deer, where you go in and the deer are just walking around free, and you can feed them, and they have little like pellets and things you can feed the deer, or corn, things like that. And so he did that. He ran that. he had a 20-year lease in there, and he ran it for 20 years. And at the end of that time, his lease ran out, and they would not renew it. They led him to believe they were going to renew the lease right up until almost the time it was expired. And then they finally just said, no, we're not going to renew your lease. We don't, we're going to build something, a better animal attraction than what you have. So he had to move in 30 days. He had 30 days to move out of there. And this was in 1982. And so I became really good friends with him, I guess, in the late 70s, because I went out there and photographed a lot of deer. And that's how we just kind of became friends. I was real interested in his deer. And he would let me go out there and just take pictures and mingle around and, mess around with the deer all the time. And so when he moved to a new location, and he ran that for another 30 years, and he retired when he was 82 years old. He was still running it when he was 82 years old. And he had over 600 animals. I mean, they had buffalo, they had, mountain lions. Oh, they had, you name it, they had it. And so we became very good friends over the years, and he always wanted to do a book about it. And so last year during the COVID thing, when everybody was home, he called me up, I guess in the summer, back last summer, about this time last summer. And he said, I really want to get this book done. And he said, I'll do anything, if you'll write it for me. It's the last thing I really want to do with my life. And so we started getting together and talking about it. And I realized it was really a great project. And so we started working on that, and we worked on it very hard for September, October, November, and December, just really, really hard. And I kind of put Dawn of American Deer Hunting on the back burner to work with him, because I knew time was of the essence. He was not doing very well physically, but mentally he was tremendously, just like Fred Goodwin, is so sharp, had so many great stories. So anyway, he had around Christmas, he fell and hit his head, and he actually sent me a picture the day it happened. His head was all bandaged up. And he said, I did a stupid thing. He said, I fell down, hit my head, but he said, I'm okay. He said, but we're not going to be able to get together. We had a meeting scheduled, I think, for the next day or 2 days later. He said, well, I'll call you in a couple of days. He says, they told me to go home and take it easy for a few days. And so he did. He went to the doctor, and they bandaged him up, and he went home. He went to bed that night, and he never got out of bed again. He just, his head got some swelling of the brain, and he was in a coma the next day, and he never recovered from that.
It's too bad.
So it was real sad, because I was so much wanted to get this thing done while he was alive. But we did it. I had about 80% done on that book. And so we're going to try to get that one out too this fall sometime. And it's just the stories of his, just animal stories and stories about how he started this game ranch and ran it for 50 years.
Wow. That's a big undertaking. I'm a farmer by trade, so I know what kind of work goes into just taking care of cows. I can't imagine taking care of lion and buffaloes and everything all together.
Oh yeah, well for him it was a 7-day-a-week job, and he was there every day,
Yeah.
And he was, it's funny, he started all these hunting clubs. He had a couple of really big hunting clubs in Georgia that he was sort of the president of the club, with 30-40 members, and they had thousands of acres leased that they hunted on. He never got to go hunt because he had to work every weekend. And so it was very rare when he would, could take a day off and go hunt. And he would go to Texas once a year, go home to Texas, and they takes a group of his sons and some family members, and they would have a big deer hunt the week of, in December. They would go every year home to San Antonio and always hunt deer in Texas. But yeah, that job of taking care of all those animals was an incredible job, and he had a real knack for doing it, and it was an amazing place.
It's what he loved to do.
It's actually a guy back during the COVID thing last year. He retired. My friend, his name is Art. He retired in 2012, and he had a young guy working for him who didn't have any money, and he sort of sold him the business for $1 down and $1 a month type thing on a kind of a loose type sale. But it wasn't really unless the guy really started making some money, he wouldn't really own it. But anyway, it didn't work out, and the state shut the boy down after 2 years. Well, another guy came in and bought it, and the guy he and his wife both had gone there as children and seen all the deer, fed the deer and things when they were kids growing up, and they were so impacted by all those animals there that when he grew up, his family had a lot of money, and he made a lot of money in real estate. Mm-hmm. And so he called Art up when he found out it had shut down. He said, "Look, I want to buy this place from you, and I want to get it going again, and I want to put money into it and really make it nice." And so he has really done that. And so it's a real tribute to Art, because it's up and running now, and he's really done a great job with it.
What's the name of?
Well, the new name of it is it's called the Yellow River Wildlife Sanctuary. It's the new place, and it's right on a river called the Yellow River, on the outskirts of Atlanta. Yeah. And so I'm going to have that. That'll be the last part of the book. The transition into this new ownership with this guy has taken over and really done such a great job with it. So it's just very sad that Art died in December, or in January. He died in early January, but the book will be a great tribute to him, and so I'm really excited about that too. So I got a lot going on right now.
You do. You've got a lot of books coming out.
And now you just made our shopping list long.
Yeah, you just made my shopping list even longer. So, yeah. I mean, all this stuff that I have is all going to end up going to my grandson and my nephews. So, hopefully, maybe one of them will write a book about me someday.
Well, that'll be good. Maybe so. That'll be great.
Yeah, and that's kind of why we do the videos too. Is it's almost like it's like a diary of my hunting life.
It is, and it's a record. It's a record of what you do. Yeah. So that's great.
So when my grandson is old enough, he's just a little guy. He's only 2 right now. So when he's old enough, if I'm not around, he can look back on all these crazy things that I did, and maybe get that into his bloodstream and do what I'm doing. So
that'd be nice. That'd be nice. Think that he could do that. That'd be great.
Yeah, it would be. I know that. So, let me see. What else I got on here? Okay, so you answered my question on how long it takes to collect the material. Were there any authors that you read in your younger days that really sparked this in you? As far as
wanting to be a writer, there were two main ones in my, young life. One was Robert Rurik, who wrote for Field and Stream, and he was a Southern writer, and I started reading his articles and his stories in Field. He had a column in Field and Stream, and I read his column. I just loved his writing and his stories. And then he wrote a couple of books that were classics, The Old Man and the Boy.
Yeah, I think we have The Old Man and the Boy. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of my, just absolute all-time favorites. And then Ernest Hemingway was another very favorite of mine, fishing and hunting, because I love the saltwater fish, and he was a big saltwater fisherman. And but hunting, he did a lot of hunting, and he wrote some great stuff, and I just loved his writing. And so those two, I love their writing style and the things they wrote about, and I wanted to write like that. Yeah,
definitely. I think I've read almost all of Hemingway's books, and his writing is so inflective, and I don't know how to explain it, because I'm not a critic or anything, and I don't know how to explain how it makes me feel, but you almost become him while you're reading the book. You can feel everything that's going on, and it's strange, because as his later life went on, you can see that in his writing, but he is one of my favorite authors too. I think when we bought one of our old houses that we lived in, we don't have TV. We do have the internet. I don't watch any television or anything, so I read, or I video myself doing silly things. And Hemingway was definitely one of the ones that every time I went to the library, it was another Hemingway book, because just everything he wrote about whether he was watching for submarines on the coast or he was on the savannah in Africa or wherever it was, you always felt as if you were him. I don't know if that makes any sense. But.
Oh yeah, I think, and that's what good editors will tell you. You know, the best editors, they'll say, you know, write me a story and put me there. And if you can do that, I'll buy the story from you.
Yep.
And that's what they want. And only a few people really have that, I guess, that ability to do that. You know, there are a lot of great technical writers. You know, they write a lot of facts down, and they're very accurate, like gun writers and things.
Yeah.
You know, they know what they're talking about, but they're just not, they don't put you there. They don't have that ability to just, that magic, you know, to you're just there all of a sudden.
That's it. It's Capstick did that for me too. Death in the Long Grass. I never want to be any place without a weapon in Africa. That's for sure. After reading anything from Capstick, because in that you basically learn that anything in Africa is there to either stab you, stick you, or kill you.
Yeah, well, I've got all of Capstick's books, and I love his writing, and he was great too. He's super. I mean, he just had a way of putting you there. So he's, you know, he and Robert Ruark wrote a couple of great African books. Of course, Ernest Hemingway wrote a great African book, and Capstick. Those are the three best African writers probably ever.
Yeah, and that brings you that takes you to a totally different atmosphere than I'm used to. I mean, we're used to the northern mountains, we're used to the snow, we're used to the cold, rocky mountains here, but you're transported into a completely different world that's almost alien to anything that you know. And you can feel that openness, you can feel that tinge of fear that you would probably have hunting a lion. You can feel that, or the fact that you're in a small canoe going down the river and there's hippos and crocodiles bigger than your canoe that could eat you. You know, all of that stuff.
Everywhere you go, like you say, there's, you know, the snakes that are 20 feet long, and I mean, it's just amazing. There's so much, anything over there can get you.
Yeah.
Cape Buffalo. Yeah. They're so mean.
But there must have been a reason why they kept going, other than just the beauty of the place. I've always wanted to talk to an African tracker and learn from them, because some of the videos I've seen on some of the African movies or the videos where they have the native trackers following spoor of something, they're reading these tracks like they're reading a book. And while I'm pretty good at that with whitetails in the snow, they're doing it in places that there's not really a track, but they can see it. So to learn from them, I think they're the ultimate.
Yeah, some of those guys are amazing, and then to read some of the stories that Hemingway and others have written about tracking across volcanic rock and things like that, and those guys are amazing. Yep. They just have an instinct. They have a sixth sense, and
it's got to be part of it. And I think we all have it. We've just lost it as we've become civilized.
I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right.
It comes back to you. I know that during the off season, when I'm not out tracking or I'm not doing any things, the best way for me to get honed up for it before the season is checking game cameras and all this. I'll track deer in the off season during the summer and look at everything and try to put the puzzle together. And I'm sure that a lot of people don't do that. It's like a lot of guys with their rifle. They won't shoot their rifle until the first week of deer season, and then they wonder why they miss everything.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
tracking is the same way. It's a perishable skill, so you have to keep up on it. But yeah, I'm trying to think. Jim Corbett is another one that I
Oh yeah. That's one of my favorite. He was one of my favorite authors too. Growing up, I read those books over and over again.
Yeah, any hunting dangerous game. I mean, he wrote a lot about what book was it? James Clark and Man is the Prey. I don't know if you remember that book, but that one just is a total different book about animals that are dangerous, and he goes through all these different stories of Jim Corbett and the Savo lions and different animals like that. That's another great author that was from the Outdoor Life book club that my dad had when I was a kid, and that was kind of he would collect that stuff. He wasn't a hunter; he fished a little bit, but we had those books, and I guess because I wasn't allowed to do that stuff, reading those books was what stoked the fire of desire to do it.
What's amazing, you said that when I was a teenager, I joined the Outdoor Life book club, and I bought every book they sent me. I mean, I bought every selection every month. I mean, I was a sucker for everything they put out. And so I still have a lot of those old books.
We do too.
Yeah, we have quite a few. Actually, I have this book here that I don't know if you remember this one from the Outdoor Life Book Club. It's the New Hunter's Encyclopedia.
I don't think I've seen that one. I missed that one.
It's huge. I mean, it's
I
really
do have a couple of smaller ones that they put out, like encyclopedias, but not that big.
Yeah, this thing weighs like 5 pounds, and it's neat. It's got the color plates, and I used to, because I am an artist, I used to go through this and go to the color plates and draw ducks and draw owls and draw all the stuff from that, and then there's different pictures in here that are from old museums and things like that are really cool, and it goes into detail about has a whole thing in there about Austin Corbin building the park that's right there with the elk and the Russian boar and everything that are here. So that was kind of neat to be able to read about Austin Corbin, who built the park in my backyard. So Corbin's Park. So it was kind of neat to all these things. Well, my wife's giving me the wrap up thing, probably because she knows I got to go to bed.
Okay, well, it's great talking to you. Let's do this again sometime.
Absolutely. We'll have to come up with a topic, and then
when his book comes out.
Yeah, we'll do your book, but I'd like to do something with Duncan before that too. We should come up with a topic, and we'll have a topic, and we'll discuss that. We'll think of something.
We'll give it a little thought.
Yeah, and then we'll tear. I'd like to at some point find someone and talk about how hunting has changed from, say, when you started in the writing business to now, and kind of discuss whether it's good or bad.
Yeah, that's a good topic right there.
Because
pros and cons.
I think you and I are on the same page. There's a lot of stuff that's going on now that's not good for it.
Yeah, that's so true.
So that we'll do that. I'll figure something out, and we'll get back together and we'll have a discussion about that. All right. Okay. Thank you. Thanks so much, Doug. This is such a pleasure for me to talk to you.
Thank you. Can't wait till we meet in person one day. And thanks to Diane for all her help.
Well, like I said, if it weren't for her, I'd be doing none of this. I'd be milking cows or something. So, all right. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Have a good evening. See you soon. Take care.